Hello and welcome back. I'm doing a book review today for The Human Predicament by David Benatar. As some of you will already know, I did a book review for Better Never to Have Been about 2 years ago, and that's had quite a big response, quite a lot of views on here, and that's led me on to this book. Now, this is quite a technical book, and there are many chapters and sections in the book. I've broken this video down into 5 sections, however, and I'm just going to be discussing the main points that I have kind of gained from this book. Okay, 5 sections, and section number 1 is about meaning. He starts off this book by giving us some good news. In his opinion, it is possible to have meaning in life on a small scale. So within your family, or within your town, or within your personal life, you can kind of set yourself goals, and you can have a certain amount of meaning in life, which is good news. The bad news is, from a cosmic perspective, looking at yourself and planet Earth from the universe, it's actually impossible to have any kind of meaning. We're a tiny speck in the universe. If there's other life in the universe, we probably will never meet it or them. So from a cosmic perspective, your life is pretty meaningless. That's the bad news. And it's this cosmic meaninglessness that can cause something called existential anxiety. And it's this kind of anxiety, this kind of existence anxiety, that is part of the human predicament. Section number 2 is regarding quality of life. As Benatar discussed in Better Never to Have Been, people are often unreliable judges of the quality of their lives. And this is due to something called the Pollyanna Principle. When we look back on the past, we tend to look back on the past with rose-tinted spectacles. We forget how bad things were, and we remember things as being more rosier than they actually were. And this is like a survival mechanism that we've gained through evolution to make ourselves happier. And So you know that his general point here is that your past was probably worse than what you think it was. So your quality of life is probably worse than you think. And he also makes another interesting point, that life in general is kind of geared towards pain and decay. Consider this: pleasure is usually fleeting. We usually have pleasure in short bursts, and it comes and goes, whereas pain is often quite lengthy. If you break your leg, you can be in pain continually for days, hours and days, maybe even weeks. And it's possible to feel pain for a prolonged period of time. But that generally doesn't happen for pleasure. You laugh at a joke, and then 2 or 3 seconds later it's not funny anymore. So there's a kind of asymmetry between pleasure and pain. And also, the worst pain is worse than the best pleasure is good. If you have some kind of accident, you could be in terrible pain, but the best pleasure that you can imagine, you wouldn't be able to top that, if you see what I mean. It's an interesting point. A secular justification for this that he mentions is, some atheists say that it's okay. We need pain in order to have the pleasure, and we also need pain to avoid injury. So, like, pain is part of life, kind of yin and yang thing. But apparently there are some organisms on Earth that don't feel pain, and they can avoid injury by using a kind of reflex action. I'm not sure what animal this is or what organism. I think it's some kind of sea creature, some primitive sea creature. I might look into this further, but the point here is that we don't need pain to enjoy the pleasure. We could live painless lives and still feel good, so we don't need pain at all. Section number 3 is about death. Now, the main thing I want to discuss here is there's an old argument that was put forward by a man called Lucretius. I think he was from like the Greek era, ancient Greece, and he came out with a famous quote or a famous idea to make people feel better about dying. And it was basically, for millions of years, you didn't exist. Before you were born, you didn't exist. And that didn't bother you, because you weren't here to be bothered by anything at all. And so, if you're worried about dying, don't be, because after you die, you won't exist. And it will just be the same as when you didn't exist before you were born. So therefore, you shouldn't fear death. Now, I think this is a good argument, but David Benatar addresses this in the book, and he kind of uses a word called annihilation. His argument is that the two are asymmetrical. Pre-birth non-existence is asymmetrical to post-death non-existence, and the reason being is because once you come into existence, it's kind of a shame to not exist anymore. You've been born, and then by dying you're annihilated. So that there was a person, and then there wasn't a person. So it's tragic. It's tragic. It's a shame, and it's annihilation. So he doesn't quite agree with this Lucretius argument. And that's the general basis why. I hope I'm explaining that correctly. Once you're born, you've got an interest to continue to live, and when you die, you're kind of deprived of further life. So it creates an asymmetry between this pre-birth non-existence and post-death non-existence. Okay, that's the main point I got from that chapter on death. Thank you for making it to the halfway point of this video. I'd like to use this opportunity to let you know that I have a philosophy book of my own called Planet Earth, Musings from a Tormented Soul. It's full of short philosophical insights with some comical life observations mixed in too. Links for this book are in the description box below. Thank you. Back to the video. The next section is about immortality. He starts this section off by stating that there's no evidence whatsoever for any kind of religious afterlife, to which I agree. He then discusses transhumanism, which is the idea that in the future we're going to start merging with technology more and more. And we might be able to radically increase our lifespans using medical technology and all kinds of implants like microchips. And he actually discusses cryonics in this book, which I found quite refreshing, because people tend not to discuss cryonics. I think a lot of academics don't like discussing it because it damages their credibility. But Benatar actually acknowledges cryonics, and he says that it could work. He didn't really say much on the topic, but he didn't completely dismiss it, and that counts for something. A good point he makes is true immortality is impossible anyway. Even if we find like some advanced medicine that can keep our bodies going and going and going, eventually the sun will explode and engulf the earth, And even if we manage to kind of travel to another planet and live on another planet, the universe itself is finite. In a certain amount of time, I don't know how many billions of years, the universe itself will collapse and die. So that true immortality is impossible. But one day we will cease to exist. And so the whole point of this section was that if we were immortal, would that end the human predicament? And the general conclusion is no. We would still be in a predicament even if we had indefinite lifespans. We could never learn everything. We still wouldn't ask to be born, and it would be a predicament to be mortal and immortal. Or it is a predicament to be mortal, and it would be a predicament to be immortal as well. So being immortal would not solve the human predicament. The final section that I want to discuss here is suicide. Now, he makes some very clever points here. It's almost like my favourite chapter of the book. A lot of people are against suicide. They don't like to talk about it, and they don't approve of it. And one of the reasons they give is that suicide is unnatural. They say it's unnatural, so you shouldn't do it. However, saving somebody's life is also unnatural. If somebody's drowning and you pull them out of the water, it's unnatural because they were about to die and you've intervened. But nobody says, oh, you shouldn't save somebody's life because it's not natural. But they do say it for suicide. So that's a very interesting point he makes there. Also, people say it's cowardly. You shouldn't kill yourself because it's a coward's way out. But Benatar rightly asserts that suicide isn't easy at all. It's actually quite hard to kill yourself. I've read books about this for various reasons, and committing suicide it takes a lot of planning and it takes a lot of courage, and so it's not cowardly at all. And also on this cowardly thing, if the easiest option is for somebody to continue to live, nobody stands up and says, "Oh, that's cowardly. You should kill yourself instead." So why do they do it the other way around? It's another good point. Another thing people say is that it's selfish. It's selfish to kill yourself because your loved ones will be left behind. Good point. This is a valid point. But Benatar points out that it can be selfish to expect somebody to not kill themselves. If their lives are that bad, if their life is that bad and they're in pain every day, it's quite selfish to say don't kill yourself. It's quite selfish on the other person's part. And it could also be seen as selfish if somebody refuses to kill themselves. If they're in a nursing home or something, and the relatives have to pay the expenses for that nursing home, or if they're in hospital and they're on life support, and they kind of refuse for the machine to be turned off or something, that could be seen as selfish to not die, to make other people pay for your expenses. Most people don't discuss this, do they? They just say, "Oh, suicide is cowardly and selfish," and that's that. But if you really think about these things, it's not always selfish, and there are many different angles to see this from. So that's what this book is good for. It kind of it sees things from all possible angles. And while I was reading this, there were several times I thought, yeah, that's very clever. I never saw things in that way before. So yeah, it's quite a positive review, actually. My main criticism is that David Benatar is an academic, he's a professor, and so you get this academic writing style. It's quite robotic, it's quite mechanical, and you have to kind of push yourself through certain chapters, which is never good. So that's a bad point to the book. Also, I'd like to mention that he ends this book with some advice. You know, we're all in this predicament together, so how do we deal with it? And his advice is to go through life employing what he calls pragmatic pessimism. So you acknowledge the fact that life is a predicament. You acknowledge the bad things, but you kind of distract yourself from them on a daily basis. He basically advises you to give yourself some meaning on a small scale. Give yourself some meaning within your family or in your town. Give yourself some hobbies. Set yourself goals and distract yourself from the predicament. But don't do it to such an extent that you end up giving birth to more and more children, because if you do that, you act as a kind of vector for the predicament. You spread the predicament to other people, but do distract yourself from it by giving yourself meaning, because otherwise you're gonna be suffering every day, and your life and your existence is going to be a long grey trudge. So it's going to be unbearable. So he use distraction to a certain extent. Okay, and that basically sums up my review here for this book. If you enjoyed Better Never to Have Been by David Benatar, give this a read. If you don't like academic technical books, I wouldn't advise reading this one, because as I've said, he writes in a technical way. And that's it. That's basically my review of this book. I hope you found it insightful. I hope you found it helpful. And I'll be back in about 2 weeks or so with another book review. In the meantime, try to have a great day on this rock we call Earth, and give yourself some goals, give yourself some distractions, and try to be as happy as possible. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.